You have no idea how cool I am now. I got a fucking light, I got a
Yeah.
camera, I got a microphone.
Where are you, Jamie?
I'm in Manhattan. I'm in a apartment I'm borrowing in Tribeca in a house that's being reconstructed that used to be owned by Gwyneth Paltrow.
Oh my God. Honestly, I think he only gets houses owned by famous
Famous
actresses.
actresses.
Yeah.
But one of the downsides of that is that it is Manhattan and it's after 9 a.m. And you know what that means? There's a jackhammer right outside that may pipe up at any moment.
Well, Jamie, you're in that apartment. This weekend I was in France. You see my t-shirt, Roland Garros. It's the French Open tennis. And I think everybody in the world will remember where they were of 5.5 hours of the men's final between Alcaraz and Sinner. And it was just a triumph of tennis. It was brilliant. And the day before was brilliant for women's tennis too. The American Coco Gauff won against the number one, Arina Sabalenka. It was really, really tremendous. At the end of it, there were memes going around after yesterday's. I mean, really, the audience and the viewers were as exhausted as the players. It was hilarious. 5.5 hours, amazing. I am going to start a movement, though. I think, Jamie. What do you think? I think it's excruciating and horrible to see the losers have to give some kind of concession speech afterwards and pray. Oh, it's awful, it's horrible, it's so awkward. I think it should stop. So I'm going to just say that just the winner should be speaking in center court at that time. But listen, it's a good way to start off our confrontations and our global standoffs for today's episode. So, this week, there are two major standoffs that we're going to talk about with global fallout. At home, President Trump pushes another new boundary as he uses the military to enforce his political agenda. What's going to come of that? And abroad, China, perhaps the biggest threat to the West and to the United States, period. Now, Xi and Trump, I think, finally spoke for the first time this week. There'll be talks now to try to figure out the trade war, which has caused so much chaos. China wants to take over, Jamie, I think, as world superpower. And the question is Trump playing into Xi's hands? And also, we're going to touch on the now, famous, I don't know, is it a reality show, but the famous fallout between Trump and Elon Musk, and who stands to lose the most. Hello and welcome to the X-Files with me, Christiane Amanpour, and Jamie Rubin. I'm a long-time correspondent for CNN, and I've spent more than 30 years in the field, and now I have a TV show in which I try to hold leaders accountable.
And I'm Jamie Rubin. I've been a senior diplomat under Presidents Clinton and most recently under President Biden, working closely with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken.
And we also happen to be a married couple. We were married for 20 years, divorced for 7, hence the X in the X-Files. And we figured that if we can have a conversation about some of the most polarizing, poisonous, difficult, alienating topics, but necessary to discuss, if we can do it, then hopefully other people can, especially world leaders, because we really need to find some way to have rational discussions over what's plaguing the world and how to find solutions. By the way, you're fuzzy. Is that normal? Well, Jamie, look, we're struggling. The video's too bad. The sound is too bad. You need a better Wi-Fi connection for next time, but we're only going to be able to use me on the video this time, and they won't get to see you this time, but they will next time. Anyway, onward with this episode. So everybody, we're going to do something a little unusual. We are going to start with some of the hot topics that are going on in the United States and have been over the last several days. The first is the extraordinary, some say historic, deployment by President Trump of the National Guard into California to quell protests over his immigration agenda. This despite Governor Gavin Newsom of California, who never wanted the National Guard deployed. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to talk about what everybody wants to know, and that is, what is the consequence? What is the effect of the bust-up between the two best buddies, first buddies, President Donald Trump and Elon Musk? Honestly, you can't escape what happened over the weekend in California and what's still going on, and that is a crisis in which President Trump did something historic, and not in a necessarily good way. He deployed the National Guard, fully militarized in the gear, in the vehicles, to take what he said control of what he said was riots over uh, an immigration issue. They had raided an area where they wanted to find illegals, arrest them, deport them, and all the rest of it. The issue, Jamie, though, is that he had been talking to California Governor Gavin Newsom before sending in the National Guard. Newsom said it wouldn't be a good idea to send in the National Guard. He didn't ask for the National Guard. And he said, we can deal with it and we have it under control. And apparently, Jamie, they did have it under control. And even the LA authorities and the law enforcement authorities sent out a statement saying they thanked the activists and the protesters who were protesting this deportation effort for, for handling it right and within the rule of law. And then the National Guard came.
This is the latest in President Trump's weaponization of government. He's exercising the maximum powers of the commander in chief and the president across the board. And you got to remember, if there's one theme that ties together all of Trump's behavior and all of his policies, it relates to immigration. And he wants to make a civil war in our country over immigration. I say that as a political civil war. He wants to see a battle between those like him who see immigrants as a threat across the board, a presumption of a threat, versus those who see our country as a nation of immigrants, who believe that immigration needs to be controlled, but it's a good thing in general. It's allowed America to grow and be successful. So using the National Guard is his device to try to create a political battle that will be vivid on the television screens of the people of the United States. And Stephen Miller, his deputy chief of staff, who's the hawk on immigration, has seen this as a great device to dramatize the battle over immigration. And that's what he's doing here, exercising unusual powers that are not necessary, that are intended to drive up the civil strife in our country over immigration. And it's a tragedy. Normally, a president wants to bring our people together, wants to help us learn from each other, to talk to each other the way you and I are talking to each other. But no, he wants to create violent confrontation between pro-immigration protesters and the National Guard. And that appears to be his objective. If it wasn't his objective, he wouldn't have sent them in because, as you said, the situation was under control.
The thing is here, Jamie, the majority, certainly of his voters, and maybe even the majority of the American people, want a tough hand on immigration. That was a huge part of his election victory, and they still do. Now, they're not so happy with the deportations and the no rule of law, no due process, and things like that. And I remember just before the inauguration, the outgoing head of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, said he believed that once ordinary Americans saw their own neighbors, the people who may work for them, the people who they, send their children to school with and see all the time, wouldn't stand for this, amped up crackdown and arrest and deportations. And we've seen all the flights that have gone out in the past, even despite, you know, despite the judge's rulings, that the American people wouldn't stand for it. And it's true that the polls show they don't like the way it's being handled, but they still like a tough hand on immigration. President Trump is riding a wave that exists even here in Europe of anti-immigration.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. This is a policy that the Democratic Party has not come to grips with. There is every reason to make sure that illegal immigration is handled properly with criminal charges, with a proper immigration service that prevents and minimizes illegal immigration. But to do so in the way that President Trump is doing it casts doubt on the fundamental principles of our country. Remember, we are unlike any other country in the world. We are based on an idea. We are based on democratic principles of individual liberty. And we are a nation of immigrants. We don't. We're not a country based on thousands of years of the presence, because the people that were here in the beginning were the Indians. So we need to remember where we came from, what made us strong, what made us great. But until the Democratic Party figures out a way to talk tough on illegal immigration, but also pay tribute to legal immigration, which is what I believe in, then we're going to suffer from this wave you're talking about. Because it's true that all over the world, immigration is a political hot potato, and the Democratic Party hasn't figured out how to talk about it. And I'll just give you one example of that. We should remember that when Biden was chosen as the nominee in 2020, other candidates on the stage of those debates were in favor of open borders, literally letting anyone come here to the United States who wanted to. That was madness. And it was that madness that opened the way for the opponents of open borders, including myself, to say, what's going on with the Democratic Party? And that helped, I believe, to generate the opinions and the political power for those who helped Trump win the election in 2024. The Democratic Party hasn't come to grips with immigration. Until it does, we're going to be a minority party.
Of course, the original indigenous inhabitants of the United States, the Native Americans, paid such a heavy price for all of this. It's really tragic, and frankly, still are paying a heavy price. Can I say we should move on to Elon Musk and Donald Trump? Does it matter? Does it matter? It's just two big billionaires with huge platforms who've broken up very publicly and now with so much vitriol. But what does it actually matter? You know, a lot of people think Musk is going to come out on top. Personally, I'm not sure, because the president of the United States is the president of the United States with all the powers accorded and all of those that he takes.
Well, you're right. I've tried to become a bit of an analyst of the behavior of billionaires and political leaders, and how they respect and are jealous and envious of each other in different ways. And I've seen that over the last 30 years. Elon Musk, the richest man in the world, wanted to exercise government power, because government does have a unique power: military power, economic power, bureaucratic power. And he tried to play dictator of our bureaucracy. And he did some things for which the millions of people are going to suffer around the world. And that is the destruction of the Agency for International Development, which he happily described as, a crazy place that he was going to use a chainsaw on. This is the place that provides assistance, medical assistance, a crucial prevention of disease for people all over the world, and was something Americans were proud of and the people of the world respected America for. That's what Elon Musk's legacy will be in his, whatever, 90 days with his chainsaw.
Can we just put a figure on that? Because I read a figure of 55,000 deaths overseas from AIDS alone because of gutting PEPFAR, which was President George W. Bush's transformative AIDS prevention plan for Africa, saved tens of millions of lives, and already in 4 months.
And it shows you what happens when a man like Elon Musk, who is very wealthy, thinks he knows everything, and is completely ignorant of the way the world really works, because he lives in his own ridiculous bubble where people just tell him how brilliant he is. In his behavior, he did terrible damage. And so the fact that he's gone from the White House is fine with me.
So, Jamie, firstly, he is a genius. He has, he's advanced so many technological, amazing things that people are going to still need and want, governments and NASA and everything else. But secondly, on the axe and the chainsaw, the administration is now in the United States trying to hire back many of the federal workers who were summarily basically kicked out by Doge, because they don't have people to run the bureaucracy anymore, or at least parts of it, or probably a lot of it.
He may be smart in certain areas, but it doesn't necessarily translate. And what he did in his time in government, by and large, was damage our country, perhaps irreparably, in terms of our reputation, for the arrogance of coming to destroy AID with a chainsaw. That is going to be one of his legacies in his obituary whenever that happens. And all I can tell you about Trump and Musk is it will be interesting to see whether Musk is as tough as he claims he's going to be, because he's got this megaphone called X. Will he use it? Will he use it to show the hypocrisy of the Republican government right now, where they talk a big game on deficit reduction and then they add trillions to the debt, where they talk a good game on doing good for the people of the United States, and where the actual bill is designed to enrich the wealthiest people in the country and do harm to those who need government's assistance the most. There's a hypocrisy at the core of the Republican leadership of our country right now. I'd be interested to see whether Elon Musk has the guts to stand up to Trump now that he's separated from him, and he probably doesn't, because these billionaires, we've learned over and over again, all they care about is their own billions. And so he's worried about his own company, and he doesn't care about any principles other than what's good for Elon Musk.
And to that point, it's been described as sort of at least a tenuous truce between them. Elon has deleted certain posts over the last couple of days. He has stopped saying that he would primary people who don't vote his way on this beautiful bill or whatever it is. So he's got a lot at stake with all those government contracts. And President Trump, as I said, has the power of the presidency to do whatever I guess he wants. So that's Trump and his domestic challenges. Abroad, as we said, there is China, which is the biggest threat to the West and to the United States. Presidents Trump and Xi last week finally had their first substantive phone call. The upshot, as far as we saw in a readout, was that Xi asked Trump to call off the China hawks in Washington, D.C. But they are apparently going to be talking in London, their teams, over how to tamp down this trade war, which can affect the whole world, each and every one of us, in terms of finances and our pocketbooks. So, Jamie, we've discussed quite a lot, how Trump is handling these huge global issues. I know you and many think he's right to identify China as a threat to the US. Do you think it's going well so far? Is he doing it right?
No, it's not going well at all. Right now, the world is, believe it or not, looking at China as a responsible country, and the United States is the irresponsible country, looking to China to lead a normal functioning of the global economy, and scared and frustrated and frankly furious with Donald Trump for raising the question of tariffs with every single country in the world, instead of using the old playbook of thinking that the American market is the be all and end all for the world. He should be building alliances. He should be strengthening alliances instead of insulting our friends and sucking up to our adversaries. He should be building alliances. And the French president has pointed out that he just can't operate if every day Donald Trump insults his country. Same with Asian allies. So, no, things are not going well. The economic decoupling that is going on and is going to go on and ought to go on, but it ought to be done smartly. And it ought to be done with an eye towards keeping the democratic nations and the nations that believe in the rules and rights we believe in on the same side, and leaving China, Russia, and others on the other side. But instead, we're the outlier, and China appears responsible.
Jamie, you just talked about alliances. There was an article recently that suggested Russia, which, as we've talked about, has such a close relationship with China on just about everything, including its war in Ukraine, that Russia actually sees China and calls China an enemy because it's afraid that China will take advantage of whatever vulnerability Russia might have and sort of press its case, even territorially, along their shared border. But it also suggested that part of Trump's, relationship, if you like, with Putin is also in part about trying to prize Russia, Putin, away from Xi's China. How do you think that's going?
Well, this is the great dream of the armchair strategist, the juvenile perception that we can pull a reverse Kissinger, they call it. Somehow we can, instead of working with China to break China from Russia, as Kissinger did, it's to work with Russia to break Russia from China, they imagine. Not going to happen. Dreamo-vision. Very simple. Yes, there are those in the Russian intelligence community and the Russian leadership who have always regarded China as a threat. And it's very simple. Look at a map. You see a huge country with a very small population on the border with a medium sized country with a gigantic population. And Russian strategists have always been afraid of what that could mean to the borders with China, to the control China might have over the Russian people. So yeah, they do a lot of behind the scenes struggling in the intelligence world. But meanwhile, on the things that matter to us, Russia and China are synchronized. The war in Ukraine being the primary thing I'm talking about, but more so that Russia and China together pose a very, very great risk of undermining the world that we've come to know for the last 75 years, where every country has the right to operate, that it can choose its alliances, that it can't be bullied. And Russia and China believe that it's okay for Russia to invade Ukraine. As bad as Donald Trump has been in bullying his allies, he hasn't invaded his neighbor. He's threatened to,
Well, he's definitely threatened to, you know.
but it's a big difference between actual invasion and big talk. So what I'm saying is that you're right. There is underlying the alliance a lot of Russians who are worried about it, but they can't do anything about it because of Putin's war in Ukraine.
And just another note on this before we sort of broaden it out a little bit. It's not just Russia and China, it's Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, and this sort of axis of anti Americanism or anti Western axis that they have developed. I mean, do you see any, is there any way that that might sort of weaken?
Well, you're right to point that out. There is a real axis in the military and security sphere between Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. North Korea, for example, has benefited greatly from military assistance from Russia and is now a much greater threat to our friends in South Korea and Japan than it ever was because Russia's helping them, while they're helping Russia by sending actual troops into Europe to fight a war against the Ukrainian people. Iran is the hope, I would say. The one area where President Trump may indeed make some progress, primarily because Iran is feeling on the back foot. Their economy is nearly destroyed. They may make an agreement with the United States and the Europeans to get out of this so called nuclear crisis we're in that will open up the Iranian economy to the West. Right now, Iran relies on China and Russia to survive. I don't think that's what their people want, but unfortunately, their leaders have done that. But we may be able to get out of that. Of the four, I would say that's our best chance.
Talking about people, there are, of course, I know a lot of people in Iran, and there's so much dissatisfaction, and the economy is really biting so hard, from the infrastructure to the ordinary people. And they really do want to see an opening to the West. I think the Iranian people are fairly unique in that Muslim Middle East part of the world because they are very pro-Western, the actual people, and they are incredibly well educated. And one of the reasons they elected the previous, more reform-minded president, who was Rouhani, who went into the first nuclear deal that was with the Obama administration, they wanted to see the sanctions lifted and they wanted to be able to have relations with the West again. So, yes, the people are very much against what's going on inside and with their own government. So we're going to go into the next segment and we're going to talk more about some of the stories and some of the personal dynamics. We're going to ask, what is Xi and Trump's dynamic? We've tried to explore Xi and Putin's in previous episodes. But also, we're going to talk about Xi's incredibly hard childhood. I mean, he had a really, really, really bad childhood, and it clearly frames him and how he's acting as CEO of China, frankly, since he got there more than 10 years ago. That's when we come back. Okay, so we're back, continuing our conversation on the very real crisis, some would say threat, that China presents, including in its dysfunctional relationship now with the United States. So, Jamie, obviously, China policy has ebbed and flowed and changed with various different US administrations. The question now, though, is as China was kind of biding its time, working its way up the superpower ladder, Do you think it's clearly now made the decision that it wants to be the superpower, that it wants to overtake the United States as the world's dominant power, and that the US and the West have somehow enabled that in a way by trying to bring China in?
Yes, and yes. Surely, Xi Jinping's takeover of the Chinese government. And remember, prior to him, there was a more of a group dynamic to their leadership. He's a proper dictator. He's a proper emperor. He's now gotten rid of term limits. He's staying indefinitely. The people around him treat him effectively as an emperor, and he behaves like an emperor, wanting the world to pay obeisance, to pay tribute to China as the greatest power in the world. Yes, that is his objective. He's made that absolutely clear. Prior to Xi Jinping, it was their objective, but it was quiet. Now, did we all make a terrible mistake? In retrospect, yes, we made a terrible mistake beginning under President Nixon and Carter to think that bringing China in economically would have an impact on their political objectives and their style of government. There were people who used to say, and I never believed this, but I used to study it, that when China reached a certain economic level, they would have to become more democratic. They would have to become transparent. Their government would necessarily become more normal in our view, rather than a Leninist Communist Party state that they are today. And so we misjudged the effect of economic growth on China's political system. They did bring hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and to that extent, we were successful. But the result is a Leninist based Communist Party that does believe that it should rule the world and that does believe that might makes right. And they've done that and behaved that way with India, with South Korea, with Japan, with all of their neighbors. And I think at a minimum, they want to basically push the United States out of Asia.
So that sort of goes to the sphere of influence kind of philosophy that certainly Trump appears to have, certainly Xi has, and certainly Putin has. Putin talks about it all the time. I just wondered, suddenly as we're talking about China, I have this image in my head of Deng Xiaoping, who was, the supreme leader after Mao, coming to America and wearing a cowboy hat. You know, that was a really different time than there is now. And also, America really wanted to have Chinese students, Chinese scientists. Sort of any brain drain was really beneficial to the United States. And I just wonder also whether there's a lot to be said for free trade that kind of softens the edges of friction and divisions and maybe makes it less likely that there will be a blow up of any kind of military or other way, or a complete collapse of the global economy. Surely free trade and trying to bring China in to act in a way that that contributes to the rest of the world and its stability is the right way to go. I mean, I really don't know what the option is. How do you stop it?
Well, that was a common view. It is a common view among many people still today that somehow we need to soften the edges and increase contact and promote people to people exchanges and build understanding and mutual respect between our two peoples, and that will, in the end, benefit us by preventing war, essentially. And that that would all be fine and good if China hadn't changed. Remember, Bush, Obama, Clinton, all had the same policy: help bring China into the world. And under the previous leaders, China didn't appear to be seeking to dominate the way it is today. Then Xi Jinping became the leader, and he got rid of term limits, and he started oppressing his own people, and he started threatening India, threatening, you remember they had border wars with the Indians. They have threatening South Korea, threatening Japan, threatening to rule the South China Sea, and engaging in the largest military buildup of modern times: naval, missile, nuclear forces. What's it all for? If we really want to have mutual understanding, the Chinese need to explain What is this massive military buildup for? They have never given a good answer to that. They've never been prepared to discuss their nuclear forces the way Russia has as part of an arms control agreement. They basically want to avoid any limitations on their growth and military capacity and hope that someday we'll all wake up and China will be so big and so powerful and so strong there's nothing anybody can do about it. And my problem with those who want to promote mutual understanding is they're not focused on the hard truths that I read about and have seen.
But you know, when you talk about Obama administration, I mean, just as an aside, I remember we went to a state dinner for then President Hu Jintao, who was one of those who the West was trying to bring in and who was a different kind of person, as you've described, than President Xi. He came just before Xi. And I remember being in the official, in the receiving line. And I guess once a journalist, always a journalist. I basically said to Hu Jintao, "Hello, Mr. President. I would love to host you on my program, and you can tell the world, what's going on in China and relations with the United States." Honestly, if he could have done, Obama gave me the evil eye, and I just thought, "Oh man, never going to be invited back." But hey, you've got to grab your opportunities where you can. I figured a state dinner was the closest I was going to get to this particular Chinese leader.
But think about what Xi Jinping did to Hu Jintao. We all saw it on television. There was a meeting of the leadership of China, and the emperor Xi Jinping had Hu Jintao removed from the meeting while he was trying to talk. This is a brutal system that requires the survival of the fittest and the toughest and the meanest. And that's who we're dealing with. And anyone who imagines that you can, as President Trump does, that you can somehow talk him into a different policy doesn't understand China and doesn't understand how they do business. The Chinese government makes decisions and the leader makes decisions, and he doesn't have a conversation with Donald Trump and go, "Oh, gee, I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to change my mind and give you some rare earths, or going to let the South China Sea be adjudicated by an international system of justice rather than China takes it all." Remember, their explanation for the South China Sea is that we're the big country. We get what we want. That's not a world we want to live in. And this is a leader that is so tough and so mean and grew up in such difficult circumstances that he became tough and mean. And we need to remember that when we're dealing with it.
He had a brutal childhood. I mean, as much as one could know about him, his father was fairly prominent and then fell afoul in a bad way of the Cultural Revolution, Mao's. And he tells his story, at least this is how it's written, of even when he managed to escape and there were beatings and he slept on a cold floor, and this went on for a long, long time. He managed to escape, to reach his home and beg his mother for shelter and food. And the mother was so either indoctrinated or terrified of the system that she refused and essentially reported him and sent him back. I mean, that's the kind of upbringing that he had. But just a thing, Jamie, you say China says we're the biggest country we can, but where does America stand when it suddenly reverts to survival of the fittest? This is, the strong survive, etc. When it talks about the Panama Canal and Canada and Greenland, we may think it's just rhetoric, but it's playing right into those strong man, territorial, hands, really. I mean, where does the US get off when Xi says to me, "Hang on a second, you say we can't have this, but you've just said that about everything in your hemisphere."
And that's the damage that Donald Trump has done to the American government's way of life, to the people of the country, and to the world by raising this idea that America would have its sphere of influence in South America, Panama, maybe Greenland. China can have its sphere of influence in Asia, and Russia can do what it wants in Eastern Europe. That's the kind of message that Donald Trump's rhetoric brings to mind. And you can imagine him thinking, "Ooh, gee, this would be fun. I can sit down with Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping at a meeting, and the three of us can carve up the world." That's not the America that Republican and Democratic presidents have been promoting for the last 75 years. It's a very different version, and it's one that puts at risk the alliances that we've had with Asians, with Europeans, with countries in the Middle East, which is our central power. We are the first leader of the world that has voluntary alliances. Our empire is voluntary. Unlike the British Empire or the Roman Empire, we have voluntary associations with over 100 countries where we deploy forces or we have treaty alliances. These are voluntary. And when Donald Trump says and does these things, it raises questions in the minds of our allies of whether it's safe to be a friend to the United States. And then he treats everyone the same in his economic warfare. And thus, we're in chaos. And you're absolutely right. It makes it harder for America to convince our allies and Europe and Asia to show that China needs to be put in some form of containment because of the threat that it poses.
Mm. I tell you, this has been a long time coming. I just flashing back to 1978 when it was still seriously communist China I'm talking about. And I went on some quasi-official trip from Iran with in any event, that's what we did in the summer of 1978. And we were taken all over. There were no cars for anybody except a few officials and us as guests. Everybody was on bicycles. Everybody, men, women, and children, were wearing the same, what we call the Mao uniform, the sort of, high collared khaki uniform. I remember even talking to our female guide, and one of us asked her, does she like to wear makeup? Makeup, God forbid. We must all look the same, think the same, do the same. I'd hate to stand out. Honestly, I remember this, to this day. And then we were taken to see their incredible achievements. So they took us to they call them children's palaces. And there were these children who were barely yay high. Honestly, they were tiny and just barely poking their noses above, let's say, a ping pong table and playing ping pong like world champions. It was incredible. And for a long time, they were practicing to be brilliant. And the same in the violin lessons and the same in all the other spots that we visited. It was this mass, mobilization of excellence and numbers. It was incredible. It's never left me.
One example I remember vividly, accompanying Madeleine Albright to the Women's Conference with then First Lady Hilary Clinton. And the surveillance they did on us was so dramatic that one day Madeleine was in her room flipping through the TV channels, and suddenly she got to a channel of the people spying on her with their headphones on, listening to her. And so we need to remember they may put on a smiling face, but these are ruthless, tough negotiators and ruthless, tough intelligence officials. And this country is something that we need to be wary of.
Yeah, Edward Snowden told us about the US scraping everybody's surveillance and intelligence and data and all the rest of it. It's tricky, but I hear you.
One of the things that I learned in several decades in government and foreign policy about the Chinese is that they are a uniform government system, so that when you think you've developed a friendship with some diplomat and then the policies of their government shift, the diplomat stops being your friend. So they are a unified system, the way you described, whether it was violin lessons or ping pong or whatever it is. Um, in all of the visits that I took to China with Secretary Albright and others, you have to realize that they are a formalistic society. And Donald Trump's idea that you can suddenly, mix it up with the leader of China and get new decisions and fix all the problems in a meeting, which he thinks he's done in real estate deals all over the world. Yeah, maybe in real estate. We're dealing with the largest country in the world, led by an emperor who decides privately what they're going to do and then implements it. And he's not going to be affected by sweet words from Donald Trump. They are a formalistic diplomatic system. And when you get to the leader, the decisions have already been made, and don't think you can change his mind.
And just a quick pick up on that, a follow up. Xi has said it himself. Angela Merkel, the former Chancellor of Germany, writes very clearly in her book, and she told me during an interview, that Xi essentially let it be known that China is, what he said, going to regain what he called its rightful place as the dominant power in the world. But look, Jamie, that's it for this week. Thank you all for listening. and watching. Make sure you're following the feed so you never miss an episode. And we'll see you on Thursday for our bonus episode where we answer your questions. So keep them coming because we do love hearing from you. Email us at amanpourpod@global.com or find us on social media at amanpourpod. You can also listen to Christiane Amanpour Presents The X-Files on Global Player. Download it from the App Store or go to globalplayer.com. That's it for this week.